Så, tack så mycket. Jag ska ta på mikrofonen till Fredrik också. Där. Jag pratar lite svenska nu, men vi kommer hålla det här på engelska för Leilanis skull. Och jag vill också säga att vi filmar det här samtalet. Så vi kommer inte ha någon publikmikrofon, men jag kommer upprepa alla frågor härifrån så att vi får med det på kameran. So, thank you so much for your film. And I want to start with, because I remember when I saw this film the first time, it was like, okay, this is the superhero of the cinemas for this fall. It was so amazing. So I wonder, Fredrik, how did you find this superhero?
How do you find superheroes these days? Yeah, that's a good question. On Twitter. It's a great platform for. If you Twitter has a lot of stupid people like presidents and so on, but there's also a lot of interesting people talking to each other. And then I started to follow Leilani, and maybe half a year later I saw something. I read something you posted that I thought was really interesting, and then I wrote to you and said, "Can we talk?" And we Skyped. And then said, maybe we could meet. Are you coming to Europe? And we met in London. And then we filmed a bit. And I went back to my editor and I checked, okay, she's good. And then you had an official mission to Chile. And I've been a lot in Chile. I speak Spanish, and I have friends, so it was easy. So I went there, and my Brazilian cinematographer friend, Janis, came along, and then we shot for like a longer time, and then we went up to Toronto to also shoot, and then we started to finance the film. But the doc film is like, it's complicated because people think they don't understand what I'm about to do, so I have to kind of show it, and I have to show that I have a person on camera that people would like to stay with for a while, so she was also a seller, let's say.
That's good. You're a good seller. But you have been following each other for quite some time. Not only the time we see then in the film, but quite some time before the film as well. So, Leilani, for you, have you seen any changes in this question since you met Fredrik the first time?
I think I say that things have fundamentally changed since. Since I became rapporteur, but certainly since I met Fredrik, and absolutely since the film has hit the screens around the world, and it's really like just kind of taken off. When I first was rapporteur, and even up until I met Fredrik, there was a lack of energy around the idea of housing, around the idea of challenging housing as a commodity, and around the idea of housing as a human right. And I mean, even my sector, which I consider my sector the housing sector, so NGOs working in the housing area, ministries of housing, no one was talking about this. No one was grappling with it. And I mean, if anyone was going to, it would be the housing sector. And yet they weren't. The human rights world wasn't, absolutely not talking about it. The business and human rights world not talking about it. And now it is the conversation, certainly in housing circles, but also far beyond. So yeah, huge change. And I really, it was part of why I was so attracted when Fredrik tweeted at me. At first I ignored it. I was like, oh yeah, make him, you want him. I think he said something very distilled, like, interested in making a movie, question mark, or film, you know.
It's totally in your work, I said.
And I was like, yeah, like film, whatever. I get a lot of, stuff. And so, and then I looked him up and I was like, oh shit, he's like the real deal. And he's clearly the real deal, as you saw. I mean, really amazing film. But I knew when he approached me, I was like, oh, that's a game changer. Like, no one in my position, no rapporteur has ever done a documentary or been involved in a documentary like this. Maybe we get like 5 minutes in a documentary, 2 minutes, but this has become my mandate. It's my identity now. So, thank you.
Your hairdresser has a little bit to do with it.
Yeah, we really should applaud my hairdresser.
Yeah, because when I listen to you, it's obviously that you say that the film in itself has opened the doors. So the film has the impact on the questions, if I understand you correctly.
Absolutely. I mean, you all just had this experience, and I'm imagining many of you are like, what? Like, it's a total eye-opener. It's a wake-up call for everyday people. We've had governments see it, urban planners, architects, people in the development field. A lot of people are just like, whoa, and they didn't know that, and I certainly couldn't convey that all across the world the way the film can to thousands of people. I mean, I'm just one little person. How much access do I have? But the film is just, it's reaching so many people. So yeah, no, it's... Yeah.
Could you ever imagine that when you started working with a film?
I think when you're making a film, you're kind of, you try to make a film that works. It's so much work to do a film. And it's also so much work to try to understand what's going on, and then find a way to tell it so I myself would have understand it. Because I'm not an academic. I don't read thick books. So I'm putting simple questions and trying to get simple answers, and that's a lot of work. So my focus has been trying to make a film that works, and then the next step to get the film out. Of course, I've done some other films that had reach. So of course we hoped that the film would be strong and that it would have a journey, and it has. Yeah, that's cool.
I was thinking, now we're here in Sweden, and you will all have your time for questions. But so, talking about Sweden, I remember when I first met you, it was in Almedalen this summer, and you had this interview, and there was this question about what was the worst thing you had seen on your traveling around the world. And then you said, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what is happening today in Sweden. So I thought we should start with your point of view on what is happening today in Sweden.
Yeah, I think you should get both of our points of view, because, of course, Fredrik is in-country and I'm external, and so there's some probably some differences. But I mean, I'm deeply concerned by what's happening here, in particular because I'm not sure people in decision-making positions are really understanding the threat here. Not just the threat, it's already happening, and you saw Uppsala in the film, and today I went to Husby. It's happening there. I mean, units are being purchased in big numbers by these big actors who have a lot more power, political power, and a huge amount of money. They're coming in and they're making housing unaffordable. They have a bullying kind of tactic. The tenants I met today living in those circumstances feel very vulnerable. They feel like that they're being pressured to move out of their homes and communities. They've lived there for decades, and it's unacceptable. I mean, why wouldn't governments here be defending people and defending their right to remain in their homes? So that's my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because when I started to work with this, there was a lot of things I didn't know about. I mean, I didn't know that Blackstone was in Sweden. I didn't know the real role of the criminal money. I didn't know about the pension money that we were also, So there's a lot of things to learn, and also how aggressive it is. I didn't know. So, but now in Sweden, my feeling is that most journalists don't know, most citizens don't know, most politicians don't know. But when we're out in Husby this morning, they know, and that's a bit scary, because there's a lot of citizens out there who actually knows exactly what's going on, but their voices are not heard. So that's a bit scary, and so I think there's the film has still a job to do, and all of you has a job to do to share the news about this kind of, it's, you see it in the film. It's the financial crisis 2008. The governments tried to save the banks. they saved the banks by actually giving away people's homes and giving a lot of money to these hedge funds, giving them tax credits and so on. And that has totally changed the planet. So we went from national housing companies, national corporations, to these kind of global actors. And these are Wall Street boys. So Blackstone have never been into housing before. They entered 2011, that's 8 years ago. Can you imagine? 8 years ago. Now they are the biggest player in the whole world, the biggest landlord in the whole world. And they don't care about people who's living in their houses. They are delivering growth to investors. Their clients are the investors, not the people living in the houses. So the distance is much larger now. And so it's a new scene. And I think when politicians talk about this, they think this is like, we have a problem, we need to build more, it's like this. And they don't really get that this is like an urgent, the amount of money floating in, I'm not know if I will, well, we can talk about if they care or not, but I don't think everybody understands it, because if they understood it, they would also be worried. And I think what's happening now in the cities around the world is that people are reacting and they're pushing the politicians to do things. So now in Berlin, for example, they have a 5-year rent cap taken now in the Senate. 5 years of freezing the rent. Why? Because they want to let's slow down the speed of the influx of money. Denmark, with the new government, after the film had a premiere in Copenhagen, it's been used a lot in the debate. They had a Blackstone committee in the parliament that now is delivering its results. So they are also now coming up with new legislation how to freeze that kind of money. And already at this stage, the investments are going down. So they are managing to freeze it a bit. But here in Sweden, still, it's very soft. So we are far behind. And the only way for us to get on top of this is that all of you, start to talk about it.
Let's talk about it. Maybe we have some questions. Yes, we have a lot of it. You are first one.
You mentioned the rent caps, and you mentioned buying the property back from the investor companies. Is there more things like legislation or something we can do? What are the examples? What are the suggestions there?
So what are the suggestions? What can we do? I mean, so the rent caps, I mean, what we see right now in the world is like, we have to do something now, let's find out rent cap. New Zealand has blocked all foreign investments. Some countries have a tax of empty apartments. So there's a lot of these kind of quick, let's do something. I don't think anybody has the long-term solution on how to freeze the money. I would say close all the tax havens, because I mean the influx of criminal money. We see now the big Swedish banks are involved in this laundering criminal money, but the criminal money, when it's laundered, goes straight in here. That's what we have to understand. It's not floating out there on some fancy boats. It actually goes straight into our cities, and it's pushing up the values of our homes.
I agree with all of that, and I think if you look at the conditions people are living in around the world, including here in Sweden, what we see, or what my analysis is, that there's been a failure to implement housing as a human right. There's no way we would have 1.8 billion people living in grossly inadequate housing and homelessness around the world. 1.8 billion, it's a lot. That wouldn't happen if governments were treating housing as a human right. So then the question is, okay, well, what does it mean to treat housing as a human right? Here you have a constitutional right to housing, but it's not actually being enforced or implemented in any real way, as far as I can tell. So I've been encouraging governments to really get down and dirty and understand what it means to do the right to housing. It's a way of governance. It's a way of practicing the right to housing. So now we have countries around the world starting to adopt legislation, for example, that really recognizes the right to housing and says policy must be implemented in a way so that every policy decision we take results in the implementation of the right to housing. So if you're using that as your guide, for example, then you wouldn't be able to let in these private actors to do what they're doing. Because when Blackstone or Vonovia or Achilles comes in and is here doing what they're doing, we know it's undermining the right to housing. People are losing their homes because they're forcing up the rents and people just simply can't pay. No one, your rent is increased overnight. Does your income increase overnight? You're lucky if your income increases over the next 5 years. So I think there's a real lack of seriousness of governments to say, oh, housing is a human right, and to say, okay, this is somehow different than other commodities like gold or steel, right? Because those aren't human rights, and we know housing is. And governments have committed to it in international law.
You're in black.
Yes, are you working alone with this project? I mean, I know a Welsh author, which named Oliver Barrow, who has written a book that's called Moneyland, and it's very much about investors making huge money investing in housing, and I think this is. I think you're working with the same thing. Revealing what's behind the scene, we don't see this money because it's totally invisible, but there are huge money. This is trillions of money, and I just thought about, have you heard about him? Have you collaborated in some way?
Did you say Moneyland?
Yeah, it's a book written by Oliver Barrow, a Welsh author.
Yeah, I know the book, and I have a stack of books like this, of things that have come to my attention because of the film and this work.
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't say is, as rapporteur, most rapporteurs do like a whole bunch of issues all the time because, you know, we're busy and so much is coming our way. As a result of the film, I've actually really focused my work on this financialization. And because of the film, I think Fredrik and I have met like every expert, every group that's already working on this issue. The only thing that I find is that very few, maybe I'm the only, and Fredrik now, that's really viewing this from a human rights place. Because we can talk about the issue, which we need to, and we need to understand it because, you know, it's happening and we're in the beginning stages of understanding, so we need to keep reading and understanding. But when I start looking at what is an appropriate response, I find a lot of the academic literature doesn't leave me with much. Whereas I think there's a human rights response here, and governments have legal obligations. So then I have a road to follow.
I mean, what I'm really interested in is to find a way to shift the language, because the people with most money in our society is hiring PR companies, lobbyists, to kind of create political language, talking points for politicians, for journalists, and we see all their explanation models of how society works, why it's so expensive. That's all of us are kind of using that, and so it's time to shift back. And I think already we have now finished off the word gentrification, because this is not gentrification, it's something totally, completely different, so please stop talking about gentrification. But also, what Leila, and I also believe in simple language. We've had for a long time people saying housing market, housing market. That's been like the song. When Leilani is shifting it back to say housing, human right housing, it's that simple, but it's actually quite radical, and it's not left or right. You know, it's something we all could kind of unify around. Housing is a human right, and then governments have to see that it works. And then some stupid people come and say, yeah, but it's not the human right to live in the middle of Stockholm. No, maybe you're right, but it's not. It's if you're getting kicked out, your human rights are deprived. You know, so it's anyway. So this is like the battle we're in. It's a language battle also. So I hope the film is also kind of giving all of us a new take on this. So whenever that's what we see happening when people have seen the film. They can't come with the same stupid arguments any longer. And there are some people, you know, fastighetsägarförening, you know, that kind of lobbyists. They're tweeting me with a lot of arguments, and I asked them, "Have you seen the film?" "No, I don't have to see your film." "Well, but then we can talk, you know." It's like, okay, but so I mean, I don't mind people who come from every political camp to talk to me, but please, let's talk about what we've experienced here.
We have a question over there.
Yeah, hi there. This is the third time that I see the film, so how long have we got?
Not too much.
First of all, I want to thank you, Fredrik and Leilani, for the incredible work that you do and have done. Then, as I said, I have a little bit of a difficulty in finding what question to ask. So maybe I'll just throw 3 questions at you. And one of the things that I would like to ask is about the people that are kind of portrayed in the film, but there's this kind of transition of migration posed by Saskia Sassen, saying, you know, there's because of land grabbing, there's loads of urbanizations happening, and then they come to the cities and they lose their homes. Where do they go? I'm kind of missing that piece of the puzzle in the film.
Where do people go when they get kicked out from the city, when they get pushed out?
Go back to the countryside, right?
It's actually a very good question. Some people sleep in cars. Some people are driving cars, like they're driving Uber on overtime, extra time to be able to pay the rents. Some people are living jam-packed in very small apartments. I mean, I guess a lot of you here in Stockholm already live really. It's much more of compact living. So I mean, so some people are really kicked out, and some people try to stay. Some people work more to be able to make it. So it's so there is. I mean, because the thing is that, and you know that in the Stockholm region that even if it's cheaper in Sigtuna or Eskilstuna, it's still much more expensive there now than it was 2 years ago. So whatever happens here also happens there. So the only place where you can actually go is a place where there is no job, there is no service, there is no communication. And then you can live happily. so that's well, that wasn't really an answer, but that's for now. Yeah.
Can I get 2 more questions?
No, I think we need some more voices in also, please.
Then we take you first.
Yeah, the shift.
The shift.
Tell us about the shift. Is that a global movement? Is that a movement that everyone can join, or?
Yeah, so the shift is a global movement to secure the right to housing. And I have 2 big partners. You saw this mayor's meeting. That a lot of people after the film say, "Oh my God, you are so busy. How did you organize that meeting?" I co-sponsored that meeting, but I didn't organize it. That was organized by one of my partners, United Cities and Local Governments. It's a big umbrella organization for local governments, 250,000 local governments. And then my other partner is the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN. And we're moving forward with the shift. So I'm finding it amazing. Cities are actually approaching us at the moment to join the shift. So different municipalities are saying, hey, we're interested. And just recently Toronto, surprisingly, came forward and said that they would like to be to have a conversation with me about the shift. We're trying now to bring in more people. Because I'm rapporteur, it's been a little bit difficult to move it forward as quickly as we want, but we now have a website, so you can look up maketheshift.org and you'll find us. And we're hoping, we don't want people to just like join the shift. To be part of the shift, you have to do something. And so what we're hoping is that different sort of sectors will become part of the shift. So for example, national human rights institutions, so commissions for human rights, they've started to show interest in the shift. So they'll start, some of them are going to try to start doing more on the right to housing through their mandates. Architects have approached us. In fact, a big Swedish architecture firm, a white architecture has stepped forward. And so the question is, what could they do? Could they start asking different questions when they take on projects, like I'm not going to build this I'm not going to design this residential building unless there's affordable housing contained in it, that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking to build, but we're still in the beginning stages, but please come to our new website, Make the Shift. You can follow us on Twitter, we're just starting with all of
There is one Swedish city who is already joined.
There is one. Guess. Malmö.
Yeah, we was going to ask if there were any more cities, but it's only Malmö that has approached you from Sweden.
Copenhagen now also entered. Yeah.
But from Sweden it's only Malmö.
But I understand the tenants union is putting out a sort of call to all municipalities in cities in Sweden to join the shift. So we'll see what happens.
It's been debated in Gothenburg, but it was voted down.
Oh, shame on Gothenburg. Yes.
Jag tänkte resa. Får man ställa en fråga på svenska?
Ja.
Eller nämna någonting. Jag har några artiklar jag skulle vilja lämna över. För det finns ett Stockholmsfenomen. Och det är att hyresvärdar köper upp fastigheter, hur många som helst. Och sen förvandlar dem till lägenhetshotell. Jag bor i en fastighet med 32 familjer, varav 28 familjer bara har försvunnit. Vi är 3 kvar som kämpar för att kunna bo kvar i lägenheterna.
Jag med.
Ja,
Är det flera som har samma erfarenhet? Alltså, vi har många röster.
Okay, so this we meet all over the world. We've just been to Amsterdam, and where this issue is like even stronger. So in Amsterdam, the schools are now losing children. The teachers are not in town anymore because the children are going down, but the teachers don't have the jobs anymore because they have to commute so far. So this is happening in many cities around the world. So, and there is of course some kind of response around it. So we met with Ana Colau in Barcelona, and she has been then working together with Paris and London and other cities to find policies how to fight back Airbnb. And of course it's not only Airbnb, as you say, it's also a lot of other constructions around short-time rentals. But it's of course the short-time rentals are totally destroying our cities.
People, I'll add one thing. People always ask, like, what can I do on an individual level about all of this? And I mean, it's really 2 simple things. Is if you're traveling, people are traveling like never before. I just read a statistic. The amount of travel happening around the world is crazy now. It's like doubled since 2009. And so before you rent an Airbnb in a different city, make sure that it's actually being regulated. And so don't rent Airbnb in cities where it's not being regulated. And the other suggestion I make, it's not about short-term rental, but is if any of you are so lucky as to have a pension, check where your pension funds are going. Ask your pension fund where they're putting their money, and then you can start some resistance if you feel that you should.
Men missförstod du, eller?
Ja, jag översatte till henne. Ja.
Eftersom det är ju hyresgäster kan ju hyra ut lägenheten eller bostadsrätter, de kan ju hyra ut själva. Men hyresvärdarna förvandlar fastighet efter fastighet till lägenhetshotell.
Yeah, no, but exactly. This is like the landlords. They are actually turning their own housing into short-term rental. So this is what's happening. This is like the important message from us is that whatever happens in Stockholm or whatever happens in the world also happens in Stockholm. So there is nothing unique what happens here. It's a totally global pattern. But we see out in Husby was exactly what we see in the opening in the film in Toronto. And the actors are very often this kind of big money. So even if it is Blackstone, but it can also be Akelius, Hemstaden, it's also with Swedish names sometimes, and they behave the same.
We have 2 more questions, I think. So we take one there.
So the Airbnb thing, I had a little trouble like following how that worked. What was the issue? What was the issue with that?
So what is the issue with Airbnb?
So there's 2 issues with Airbnb. There's the issue of as this woman said, I think, because I don't speak Swedish, but of people converting anything that they own into Airbnb because they can make so much more money. Of course, you know, it's like 200 euros a night versus 1,000 euros a month. So of course there's an economic incentive, and people are turning units into Airbnb. They might, if they didn't have that option, they might actually rent that out to someone who actually lives in the city and contributes to the community on an ongoing basis. That's one. And two, what's happening is these big investors are buying up entire buildings. In Portugal, I saw it, for example. They're buying up like old decrepit buildings and renovating them and turning them into Airbnb. So it's short-term rental, it's very expensive, and they're not contributing to any longer-term affordable rental. And obviously that's problematic because there's a lack of affordable rental around. If you regulate Airbnb and say, well, it has to be you can only do Airbnb, engage in Airbnb if it's your principal residence, and only 30 to 40 days per year.
And maybe only 40% of your house, not more, for example. So there's a lot of these different ways that you have. If you come and stay in somebody's home when you're renting an Airbnb, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
But if you enter into a building where you notice that every apartment here is just Airbnb, then you're part of a game that is destroying the city and destroying neighborhoods.
Yeah, and the question is, why are governments not buying up buildings and turning those buildings into affordable rental housing for the local population? I heard of in Athens, for example, office buildings that are now vacant, you know, because everyone's working from WeWork and from their homes, so there's all these office buildings that are vacant. This is across the world, actually, and these big investors are coming in, buying them up and turning them into Airbnb. But why are city governments and national governments not buying those buildings and turning them into affordable housing?
I was recently in Mexico with a film, and that the co-workers, that kind of project was also kicking a lot of people out to co-working spaces.
Yes.
So it's part of the same thing.
I just have to warn everyone that in 3 minutes, it's not me who want to be boring, but just so the commercial will start automatically. So if we all of a sudden will become very, very silent, it's nothing we can do about it. Yes, over there.
Thank you for this movie, first of all. And then this movie was shown in the big stuff today, right? I just want to know, how was the conversation and how did you take the movie?
It was an interesting meeting in the parliament, and of course, when you show, I've shown film in the parliaments before, so you'll get people who are already interested. It's a busy building, so it's not a revolution to show the film there, but it's a step towards something. We're like putting this. It's more and more difficult for politicians to say, I didn't know. And I think that's one big step forward. But I mean, the next step forward is that you use the knowledge you know how you have, and use that to tweet and to Facebook, or call your politicians, or call your friends. Because what happens now in the countries where the most change happened, in Germany and so on, is because people are taking to the streets. People are actually letting a voice out, and I think Sweden has been a little bit too silent. So it's time to speak out if you want change.
We have one last question, and then I think it's commercial.
Yeah, one of the biggest takeouts I got from the movie was one that also Saskia Sassen emphasized, basically voting with your money and keeping the spending your money in the local area. You talked about individual actions. What is your take on that kind of individual action?
So the comment is that Saskia Sassen says that why should I buy a coffee from a multinational because that money gets sucked out of the community. And I think that's a very valid point. And if you travel around in Sweden, you come to many cities, you see it's only big chains everywhere. All the small businesses are kicked out. So if you are stressed of your rent, the local businessman, the local bar, the local whatever, are also under stress. the art cinemas. You know, all of us are under pressure from this. So yeah, I think it's important to think where you shop, and of course you shouldn't go to Espresso House or Starbucks or whatever.
I have to say, sometimes when I watch the film, that's my favorite line. Do I really need a multinational to serve me a cup of coffee?
What you can do now is you can take up your cameras and take a picture of us, and then you tag it, push the film, and then you tell your friends to come and see it, because you can still, and you can also call your cinema, the Victoria, and ask them for more screenings. All the tickets went, and there were a lot of people who didn't get in. So if you want people to come, then you need to tell the cinema that you want more. So
you guys are like the best audience ever.
So, push the film, Leilani Farha, she's also Twitter handle, and you can put my name. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Come on.
Everyone with yourself.
no, it's like, tag it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.